Please remember to subscribe. It's just one click for you, but it helps me a lot creating new videos. Thank you. Please share this video. Interest rates are going to skyrocket due to the pandemic and the inflation. With higher inflation, the 10-year bond had no choice to give a high interest rate. The money continues to flow to many who do not need it, while many Americans continue to suffer. The stupidity of the US government in dealing with this economic crisis seems to know no bottom. Checks for people who don't need them were obtained with money borrowed from my children's generation. We gave trillions of dollar tax cuts to corporations who didn't need it, who then turned around and, instead of pay increases, bought back their own stock in order to artificially inflate their value and authentically inflate their bonuses. Governments have also borrowed record amounts, which will impact fiscal policy for generations unless inflation returns to erase the debt. The point is, government and corporate spending is unsustainable here any further up, so is the housing market. It all leads to a nasty crash in commodities, which might be what the Fed wants. The bond market will be sitting on their hands this Monday. Who wants to buy $1.9 trillion of new debt? The interest going to skyrocket due to the pandemic and the inflation. It's the level of debt. It's higher than it's ever been. A small move will make repayment impossible. This whole thing is burning down. The economic pain is only about to begin. People are without food in the greatest country in the world. The 1.2% increase this year in Social Security does little to help most seniors. They continue to line up in food banks and not take their meds because they can't afford them. 1 in 12 senior citizens don't have enough food. 7.5 million seniors are unable to pay for medicines prescribed by their doctor. Medical expenses, funeral expenses, childcare for workers with children at home, small business owners who have lost income, people drawing down from their IRA for living expenses now. Some families are genuinely in need of help, but $1.9 trillion extra in this current economy has people legitimately discussing if they need even more stimulus. We are being fooled in order to get a pumped-up economy that'll hurt future generations. But the vast majority of the Biden $1.9 trillion stimulus recovery plan money isn't going to people. It's going to cronies and pet projects they always throw into any must-pass bill. Their favorite industries or unions, those who contribute the most to their campaigns. Their favorite pet projects. They won't vote to help other states if their state doesn't get the same or more. After all, they can point to that when they run for re-election, and that is always what concerns politicians the most. Not what people need, but what they need to stay in power. It is important to ask how the $1.9 trillion is going to be spent, because some spending is more prone to be inflationary than another spending. Money spent on things like pandemic response filters through a separate part of the economy that doesn't affect normal inflation. It's one-time spending on an emergency that has a large but finite demand. Money spent on paycheck replacement to feed, clothe and house people may not be inflationary if the individual has no other source of income. But if we all had an extra $100 and we all decided to buy a good bottle of French champagne, we could reasonably expect inflation in the champagne market because the supply is relatively fixed compared to sudden demand. Worry about inflation, in this case. On the other hand, keep your eye on the bouncing ball of the 10-year trees. The bond, which is up to 1.26%, while still historically anemic, is its highest rate in close to a year. The Fed will desperately continue to buy bonds upon bonds in order to suppress the rate, yet something is going on here. Perhaps foreign holders are starting to trim their holdings. In any event, Wall Street still calls the shots and will not tolerate any sort of even a modest interest rate hike. The Fed is saying there is no inflation. The cost of everything in my life is skyrocketing. The value of my home has increased like 40% in 5 years. Is this because the economy is doing so well? No. It is because it's now more affordable to more people because of low mortgage rates. When the US is selling bonds to itself via the Fed, and the Fed is printing money to buy those bonds, it doesn't take an economist to see something is fishy. I don't think I know this will end badly. Welcome back to the Atlantis Report. You are here for your daily dose of the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Please take a second to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and don't forget to also hit the notification bell. The measurement of inflation is outdated, designed for a manufacturing economy that no longer exists in our country. We are now a nation of services, the price of which has increased dramatically over the past few decades. The Fed funds rate was 18% in 1980-81, by the way. And now, with the Fed funds rate at zero, virtually every type of service, from health, auto, and home insurance, premiums to medical care, to hospital stays, to prescription drugs, to home prices, etc., have seen remarkable price increases over the past 12 years. Insurers have to raise premiums in order to fund their cash reserves because they get zero interest on them. Yes, you can find cheap and cheaply made apparel, and electronics get cheaper every year. But as a wise person once said, you can't eat a shirt or a cell phone. Yes, potato chips and soda are cheap, but has anyone at the Fed been in a supermarket and seen the price of healthy food? Those prices are out of sight. Tropicana reduced the size of its 64 ounces OJ to 52 ounces last year but kept the price the same. A spokesperson claimed consumers wanted smaller packaging and got the same value. I think not. The value of my home has increased eightfold in 37 years. The Fed has forced inflation into real estate, insurance premiums, and virtually every other service. Raising rates and tightening credit can slow or even reverse demand inflation, but we have cost-push inflation caused by the lockdowns destroying whole supply chains, causing shortages and prices to rise, and this is spreading through the entire economy from food, appliances, auto chips, etc. The velocity of money is falling and has been for over a decade, millions of businesses and jobs lost, and this will take years or even over a decade to replace if ever, and the number of people depending on government just to survive is staggering, which is the plan all along. To build it back better, as the World Economic Forum states, you must destroy it all first, which is why they are attacking states that are trying to reopen or, like Florida, never really closed. As long as everything is closed or most of it, businesses will close and be destroyed along with jobs, and more shortages are created with more higher prices. People can change eating habits and buy cheaper food and prepare different meals, but in the end, they must eat. Like during the so-called Arab oil embargo, where fuel prices went out of sight creating shortages and everything rose that was shipped and fossil fuel related at the same time as the economy was tanking. Volcker raised rates to over 18% to curb inflation. But actually he made things worse as the economy had to absorb all these higher prices which were here to stay. Gas never went back down to 35 cents a gallon. Cost-push inflation will only slow when the public rejects higher prices, but some things that are essential never really come back down because it is essential and you cannot do without. I do not have to buy that higher-priced couch, but I do have to buy food and gas, homeowners insurance, health insurance, property taxes, etc. Which is where the oligarchs have us all by the balls, whether the medical industrial complex, government, industrial complex, pharmaceutical industrial complex, oil, insurance, big ag, real estate, utilities, etc. The Fed can raise rates to 18%, but prices for the essentials will not go back down like property taxes, insurance, food, etc. Because none of these price rises are caused by demand inflation where a sustained velocity of money rises, but cost-push inflation caused by shortages. Oligarchs raising prices because they can, and are simply riding these increases in price on the back of the shortages caused by lockdowns, and everyone then jumps in. If the Fed raised rates, does anyone really think prices on things that are essential or are forced on you by the government are really going to go back to where prices were? Sure, that big screen TV or couch may be cheaper tomorrow than today, but what good is it if you cannot afford to turn on the lights and TV or need to chop up that couch for firewood because everything else that is essential and is required to survive is eating away your lifestyle, reducing disposable income, lowering living standards, lowering GDP, and creating more wealth inequality, especially taxes. Raising rates makes none of these things go down in price. The models were forecasting a commodity bull market, especially food, starting in the latter half of 2020 and going into 2024, but even I could have never imagined this being caused by the intentional destruction of the economy to push an agenda which is the Great Reset. 3 words. UBI universal basic income, but we should be careful what we ask for. If you breathe, you qualify. Millions more will feel no incentive to work and pay any taxes. But make sure the UBI is still low enough so they can still qualify for free health care. At some point, we can no longer wring enough taxes out of the economy to pay for all this. Dystopia will come where the Koch brothers et al. Think people are just too expensive. Check out the robots Boston Robotics is making. These things will take over millions of jobs sooner than later. If everyone gets $1,000 for nothing, $1,000 means nothing. Inflation takes off, work ethic is gone except for those that already have millions, and everyone's life savings is cut by 80%. The biggest mistake the politicians are making now is their push for a higher national minimum wage. Wage levels and costs of living vary widely, and what helps a New York City worker will destroy Mississippi business. People don't want free handouts, they want a sense of accomplishment. Government checks into idle hands will only lead to a wave of nihilism and despair.